There was a time when people around you spoke about you without hesitation, as if they already had you figured out, as if your silence meant confusion and your calmness meant weakness. But something has changed in a way they did not expect, because now the same people who once overlooked you are speaking about you differently, carefully, almost cautiously, like they are trying not to trigger something they don't fully understand. The conversation has shifted from underestimating you to warning each other about you, saying you are not someone to play with, that you see too much, understand too much, and think in ways they cannot predict. And what makes this even more powerful is that you never had to announce your growth or force anyone to respect you, because you simply changed in silence while everything around you stayed the same. You stopped reacting the way they expected. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. And you started moving with a level of awareness that makes people feel exposed without you saying a word. Now, they are not just talking about you, they are studying you. And that alone is the reason everything feels different. Lesson 1. They confused your silence for weakness. There was a period in your life where you made a conscious decision not to respond to everything, even when you easily could have, where you held back your thoughts, even when you had the perfect words, and where you allowed people to speak freely without interrupting or correcting them. From the outside, this created a very misleading image, because people often judge based on what they see on the surface, and silence on the surface looks like a lack of confidence or awareness. They assumed you stayed quiet because you did not fully understand the situation, or because you were too weak to defend yourself, or even because you were afraid to speak up. What they did not realize is that your silence was not passive, it was intentional, controlled, and highly strategic. You were not disconnected, you were deeply aware, paying attention to details that most people completely miss because they are too busy reacting emotionally and trying to prove themselves in the moment. While they were talking too much, revealing their true thoughts, their hidden intentions, and even their insecurities through careless words and actions, you were quietly observing everything, connecting patterns, and building a clear understanding of who people really are beneath their surface behavior. You were learning who speaks differently in different situations, who changes their attitude depending on what they can gain, and who cannot control themselves when given the opportunity to talk freely. This gave you something extremely powerful, which is insight without exposure, because you gained knowledge about them while revealing almost nothing about yourself. Now that time has passed, they are starting to realize something that makes them deeply uncomfortable, which is that you were never lost, confused, or unaware the way they thought you were. You were simply patient, and that patience allowed you to see everything clearly before making any move. That is why the dynamic has now shifted, because they understand that you were never an easy person to figure out. You were just someone who chose the right moment to reveal your awareness. And by the time they recognized it, you were already steps ahead of them. Lesson 2. You learned to see what others miss. Your growth did not just make you smarter in a basic sense. It changed the way you see the world around you, and that is what truly separates you now. There was a time when you looked at situations on the surface, just like everyone else, taking words at face value and trusting what people showed you without questioning it deeply. But experience forced you to slow down and start paying attention to the details that most people ignore. You began to notice how someone's tone changes depending on who they are speaking to, how a compliment can sometimes carry hidden jealousy, and how certain people act supportive in public but different in private. You started recognizing patterns in behavior, like how some people only show up when they need something, or how others test your boundaries to see how much they can get away with. This level of awareness did not come easily. It came from moments where you felt confused, misunderstood, or even hurt, and instead of ignoring those experiences, you reflected on them and learned from them. Over time, your mind became sharper, not just in thinking but in understanding intentions, and that changed the way you interact with people completely. Now, when you walk into a room or have a conversation, you are not just listening to words, you are reading energy, observing behavior, and noticing what is not being said as much as what is being said. People can feel this about you even if they cannot explain it clearly. And that is what makes them cautious, because they sense that you are not easy to deceive or manipulate anymore. They realize that you pick up on things quickly, that you connect dots they did not even know were visible, and that makes them more careful with their actions around you, because they understand that you are seeing more than you are showing, and that kind of awareness cannot be easily controlled. Lesson 3. You stopped reacting emotionally. One of the most powerful changes that completely shifted how people see you is the fact that you no longer react emotionally the way you used to, and this is something that took time, experience, and a lot of self-control to develop. There was a time when people knew exactly how to get a reaction out of you. They understood what to say, what to do, and how to push your buttons in a way that would make you respond quickly without thinking. And in those moments, your reactions gave them a sense of control because they could predict your behavior and use it to their advantage. But as you grew, you started to realize that reacting emotionally in every situation was not strength, it was exposure, because every reaction revealed your thoughts, your triggers, and your weaknesses to people who did not always have good intentions. So you began to slow down, to pause before responding, to observe your own emotions instead of letting them control you, and this small internal shift created a massive external change. Now, when someone tries to provoke you, they are often met with calmness instead of anger, silence instead of argument, or a controlled response instead of an impulsive one, and this completely disrupts their expectations. They no longer know how to read you easily, and that uncertainty makes them uncomfortable because they cannot predict how far they can go or what effect their actions will have on you. Over time, they start to realize that their usual tactics no longer work, that the same words that once triggered you now have no power, and that the version of you they thought they understood no longer exists. This is where the respect begins to form, because emotional control is not something that can be faked for long. It shows in your consistency, in your patience, and in your ability to remain steady, even when situations are designed to shake you. Now, instead of seeing you as someone they can influence, they see you as someone who is in control of themselves. And that is one of the most intimidating and respected qualities a person can have, because when you control your reactions, you control the situation, and once people realize that, they stop trying to play with you the way they used to. Lesson 4. You started valuing your time and energy. One of the biggest shifts that changed how people now see you is the way you started protecting your time and energy, because there was a time when you were more available, more open to every conversation, and more willing to explain yourself even when it was not necessary. And people became used to that version of you, the version that would respond quickly, give attention freely, and engage, even when it drained you mentally and emotionally. But over time, you began to realize something important, which is that not every conversation deserves your energy, not every opinion deserves your response, and not every person deserves access to you. And this realization slowly changed how you move. You became more selective with your time. You started choosing silence over unnecessary arguments, distance over constant availability, and focus over distraction. And this made people uncomfortable at first, because they could no longer reach you the way they used to. What they once had easy access to now required effort, and that shift automatically increased your value in their eyes, because people respect what is not easily available. This principle is also clearly reflected in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was known for his wisdom in choosing when to speak, when to engage, and when to remain silent. There were many situations where people would try to provoke him, question him, or waste his time with unnecessary arguments, but he did not respond to everything. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered and avoided giving energy to what had no benefit. For example, there were times when people insulted him or tried to challenge him publicly, yet he remained calm and did not lower himself to every level of conversation, because he understood that his time and energy were valuable and should be used for purpose, not wasted on proving himself to those who were not sincere. By following this kind of approach in your own way, you have created a natural boundary around yourself. and people can feel that boundary even if you never explain it directly. Now, when they think about approaching you, they think twice, because they know you are not easily accessible anymore, and that makes them more careful, more respectful, and more aware of how they interact with you. This is why the conversation about you has changed, because when you start valuing your time and energy, others are forced to value it too. And that is when your presence shifts from being common to being respected. Lesson 5. You build inner strength through struggle. One of the deepest reasons people now see you differently and speak about you with a level of caution and respect that did not exist before is because of the strength you built through the struggles you went through. The kind of struggles that most people never fully understand because they only see the final version of you and not the process that created it. And there was a time when you were tested in ways that pushed you to your limits. Moments where you felt misunderstood, overlooked, or even alone, where things did not go the way you expected no matter how much effort you put in. And in those moments, you had two choices: either break down and stay the same, or go inward and rebuild yourself piece by piece. And what makes your journey powerful is that you chose to rebuild even when it was difficult, even when there was no one clapping for you, even when no one fully understood what you were going through. You stayed with the process. You learned from your pain instead of running from it. And slowly, that pain started turning into awareness. That awareness started turning into control. And that control started shaping a new version of you that could handle situations that once overwhelmed you. And this is not something that can be faked or copied, because real strength is not about how you act when everything is easy. It is about how you transform when everything is difficult. And the truth is that every difficult experience you went through taught you something valuable. It taught you how to stay calm when things feel uncertain. It taught you how to think clearly when emotions are high. It taught you how to move forward even when you do not feel ready. And, most importantly, it taught you how to rely on something deeper than temporary comfort. And that is why your presence now feels different to people, because they can sense that you are not reacting from a fragile place anymore. You are responding from a place that has been tested, shaped, and refined over time. And when someone has gone through real struggles and come out stronger, they carry a kind of quiet confidence that does not need to be announced. It shows in the way they speak, in the way they observe, and even in the way they stay silent. And people can feel that even if they cannot explain it clearly. And this is why they are more careful around you now, because they understand, even if only subconsciously, that you are not the same person they once knew. You are not someone who will easily fall into the same traps. You are not someone who will react the same way under pressure. And you are definitely not someone who can be easily shaken by small things anymore. And this kind of transformation always creates distance between you and those who stayed the same, because growth changes your perspective. It changes your priorities, and it changes what you tolerate. And the things you once accepted without question now stand out clearly to you, and the situations that once drained you no longer have the same effect. And that shift is what makes others step back and reassess how they deal with you, because they realize that the version of you they were comfortable around, the version they thought they understood, has evolved into something much stronger, much more aware, and much more controlled. And this is where the respect begins to replace the old assumptions, because people may not always admit it openly, but they recognize when someone has depth. They recognize when someone has been through real challenges and has come out with clarity instead of bitterness. And that recognition creates a silent acknowledgement that you are not to be taken lightly anymore. And what makes this even more powerful is that your strength is not loud or aggressive. It is calm, it is steady, and it is grounded, which makes it even more difficult to challenge because it is not based on temporary emotion. It is built on experience and understanding. And this is the kind of strength that continues to grow over time, because every new challenge you face only adds another layer to your awareness, another layer to your patience, and another layer to your control. And that means you are not just strong because of what you have been through. You are becoming stronger because of how you continue to handle what comes next, and this is why the way people talk about you has changed so much. Because they are no longer looking at you as someone who is easy to read or easy to influence. They are looking at you as someone who has depth, someone who has learned, and someone who has grown in a way that cannot be undone. And once people see that in you, they naturally become more careful, more respectful, and more aware of their own actions around you, because they know they are dealing with someone who has already been tested and has already proven, not to them but through their own journey, that they are capable of standing strong no matter what comes their way. Lesson 6. You no longer seek validation. One of the most powerful and life-changing shifts that completely transformed how people see you, treat you, and even talk about you behind your back is this simple but rare realization that you no longer need validation from anyone to feel secure in who you are. And this did not happen overnight. It came from a long process of disappointment, reflection, and growth, where you slowly started to understand that constantly seeking approval from others was draining your energy, confusing your direction, and keeping you stuck in a cycle where your worth depended on opinions that were always changing. And there was a time when you cared deeply about what people thought, when you felt the need to explain your choices, justify your actions, and prove your intentions just so others could understand you or accept you. And in that phase, you were constantly adjusting yourself to fit different expectations, trying to be liked, trying to avoid criticism, and trying to keep peace even when it came at the cost of your own clarity and self-respect. And the truth is that people get used to that version of you. The version that seeks approval is easy to influence, easy to pressure, and easy to control because your decisions are no longer fully yours. They are shaped by how others might react. But then something changed inside you, something deeper than just confidence. You started to realize that no matter how much you explain yourself, some people will still misunderstand you. No matter how much you try to please everyone, someone will always find a reason to criticize you. And no matter how careful you are, you cannot control how people choose to see you. And once this truth becomes clear, it forces you to shift your focus away from external approval and toward internal alignment. And that is where your real transformation began. Because instead of asking yourself what others will think, you started asking yourself what is right, what makes sense, and what aligns with your values and your purpose. And this shift is powerful because it removes the invisible pressure that once controlled your behavior. It frees you from constantly second-guessing yourself, and it gives you a level of clarity that most people never reach because they are too busy trying to be accepted by everyone around them. And as you became more grounded in your own decisions, you naturally stopped over-explaining. You stopped defending every move, and you stopped seeking reassurance for things you already understood. And this is where people began to notice the difference. Because when someone no longer looks for approval, their energy changes completely. They speak with more certainty, they move with more intention, and they carry themselves with a quiet confidence that does not need to be announced. And this kind of independence makes people uncomfortable at first because they are used to influencing others through approval and disapproval. They are used to people adjusting themselves based on feedback, and when that no longer works on you, it disrupts their sense of control. They start to feel like they cannot read you the same way. They cannot guide your decisions the way they used to. And they cannot predict how you will respond based on social pressure. And this is exactly why the conversation about you has changed. Because now, instead of seeing you as someone who can be shaped by opinions, they see you as someone who stands firm regardless of what is being said around you. And that creates a mixture of respect and caution, because people understand that when someone does not rely on validation, they cannot be easily manipulated through praise or criticism, and that is a very rare position to be in, because most people are still influenced by how they are perceived. But you have moved beyond that level. You have learned to trust your own thinking, your own understanding, and your own direction. And this does not mean you ignore advice or refuse to learn from others. It simply means that your foundation is no longer dependent on them. You can listen without being controlled. You can consider opinions without losing your own clarity. and you can move forward without needing constant reassurance. And this balance is what makes you powerful, because it allows you to stay open while remaining grounded. And as you continue to operate from this place, your presence naturally commands more respect, because people can feel that you are not trying to impress them, you are not trying to win them over, and you are not trying to fit into their expectations. You are simply being consistent with who you have become. And that consistency builds trust in a different way, not the kind of trust that comes from pleasing others, but the kind that comes from being stable, predictable in your values, and firm in your direction. And over time, this creates a reputation that speaks louder than anything you could say about yourself, because people begin to realize that you are not influenced by temporary opinions. You are guided by something deeper. And once that realization sets in, the way they interact with you changes completely. They become more careful with their words, more respectful in their approach, and more aware that they are dealing with someone who cannot be easily swayed. And this is why stepping away from validation is not just a personal improvement, it is a complete shift in how the world responds to you. Because when you stop chasing approval, you start attracting respect. And when you stop needing reassurance, you start operating with a level of clarity and control that most people spend their entire lives trying to achieve. And the most important part of this transformation is that it continues to grow stronger the more you trust it. Because every time you choose your own understanding over external pressure, you reinforce your independence. And every time you move forward without seeking validation, you strengthen your identity. And over time, this builds a version of you that is not easily shaken, not easily influenced, and not easily misunderstood by those who truly pay attention. And that is exactly why people now say what they say about you. Because they are no longer looking at someone who needs approval, they are looking at someone who has outgrown it completely. Lesson 7. Your presence now commands respect. The final and most powerful shift that has completely changed how people see you, talk about you, and even behave around you is something that cannot be faked, rushed, or borrowed. And that is the reality that your presence alone now commands respect. Not because you demanded it, not because you forced it, and not because you tried to convince anyone of your worth, but because of the consistent inner work, discipline, and awareness you built over time that naturally transformed how you carry yourself in every situation. And there was a time when your presence did not have this weight, when you had to speak more just to be heard, when you had to explain more just to be understood, and when people felt comfortable overlooking you, interrupting you, or even underestimating you without thinking twice. And in that phase, it may have felt like no matter what you did, people did not fully recognize your value. But what you did not realize at the time is that presence is not created by forcing attention, it is created by developing depth. And depth only comes from growth, from experience, and from learning how to master yourself in situations where most people lose control. And as you continue to evolve, something began to shift quietly but powerfully. You started becoming more intentional with your words, speaking less but meaning more. You started becoming more aware of your environment, observing before reacting. And you started carrying yourself with a calm confidence that did not need validation or approval to exist. And this combination created a new version of you that people could feel even before you said anything. Because presence is not just about what you say, it is about the energy you bring into a space. It is about the way you sit, the way you listen, the way you respond, and even the way you choose not to engage in things that do not align with you. And when all of these elements come together in a consistent way, they send a message without words, a message that says you are aware, you are in control, and you are not someone who can be easily influenced or disrespected. And this is exactly why people started becoming more careful around you, because they began to sense that the version of you they once understood is no longer there. They can no longer approach you casually. They can no longer test your limits without consequences. And they can no longer assume that you will respond the way you used to. And this creates a natural shift in behavior where people start thinking before they speak to you. They start choosing their words more carefully, and they start observing your reactions more closely because they are trying to understand where they stand with you. And what makes this even more powerful is that you did not create this change by trying to control others. You created it by controlling yourself. And that is the key difference. Because when you try to force respect, it often comes across as insecurity. But when respect is the result of self-control, awareness, and consistency, it becomes natural and undeniable. And people can feel that difference immediately, even if they cannot explain it logically. And this is why your presence now carries a kind of quiet authority that does not need to be loud to be effective, because it is rooted in who you have become rather than what you are trying to prove. And over time, this presence continues to strengthen because every experience you go through adds another layer to your understanding, another layer to your patience, and another layer to your ability to remain steady in situations that would normally create chaos for others. And this steadiness is what makes people trust your strength, even if they do not fully understand it, because consistency builds credibility. And when your actions, your reactions, and your behavior align over time, people start to recognize that you are not acting based on temporary emotions. You are operating from a place of clarity and control. And that makes you difficult to challenge because there are no obvious weaknesses to exploit. And this is also why some people may feel intimidated by you without you doing anything aggressive. Because when someone cannot read you easily, cannot predict you accurately, and cannot influence you emotionally, they begin to feel uncertain around you. And uncertainty often turns into caution, and that caution is what people describe as respect, even if they do not use that word directly. And what is important to understand here is that this level of presence is not about being distant or cold. It is about being grounded, aware, and intentional in a way that naturally sets boundaries without needing to constantly explain them, because your behavior already communicates those boundaries clearly, and people respond to what they experience more than what they are told. So, when they consistently experience you as someone who does not tolerate nonsense, someone who does not react impulsively, and someone who values their time and energy, they adjust their behavior accordingly. And this is where the real shift happens, because now you are not chasing respect, you are attracting it. You are not asking people to take you seriously, they are choosing to take you seriously based on how you show up. And this is a completely different position to be in, because it puts you in control of your own standard rather than depending on others to define it for you. And as you continue to grow into this version of yourself, you will notice that your environment starts to change as well. The people who cannot align with your level of awareness will naturally distance themselves, and the people who do understand your value will approach you with a different level of respect and intention. And this filtering effect is not something you have to force. It happens automatically when your presence becomes strong enough to reflect your true standard. And the most important thing to remember is that this is not a final stage, it is a continuous process. Because presence is something that evolves as you evolve. It deepens as your understanding deepens, and it strengthens as your discipline strengthens. And that means the more you stay consistent with your growth, the more powerful your presence becomes, and the more natural respect you will command without ever having to demand it. And this is why the gossip about you has changed so dramatically, because people are no longer looking at the version of you they once underestimated. They are looking at someone who has developed a level of awareness, control, and strength that speaks for itself. And whether they say it openly or quietly among themselves, the message remains the same. You are not someone to be taken lightly anymore. You are not someone to be easily understood or easily influenced. And most importantly, you are not someone they can afford to disrespect. And that realization is what transformed their tone, their behavior, and their entire perception of you. And it all came from the simple but powerful fact that you chose to work on yourself consistently until your presence became something that speaks even in silence. At the end of everything you have gone through, and everything that people are now saying about you, the most important truth to understand is that this shift in how others see you was never about them changing suddenly. It was about you changing slowly, in a way that could not be ignored, because you stopped reacting the same way. You stopped giving away your energy freely. You stopped seeking approval, and you started building a version of yourself that is more aware, more disciplined, and more controlled in every situation. And over time, that inner change began to reflect outwardly in the way you carry yourself, in the way you speak, in the way you stay silent when it matters, and in the way you no longer allow people to access your time and attention without purpose. And this is why their tone about you shifted from underestimation to caution, because people naturally adjust their behavior when they realize someone is no longer predictable or easily influenced. And now, even those who once overlooked, you are careful with their words because they can sense that you are not the same person anymore. But what you need to remember is that this is not the final destination. It is simply a reflection of your growth so far. And if you continue on this path with consistency and awareness, staying grounded in your values and focused on your own development instead of external opinions, then your presence will only grow stronger, your clarity will deepen, and your life will keep moving in a direction where respect becomes a natural response to who you are, not something you have to ask for or prove, because real transformation is not about what people say about you for a moment. It is about who you become over time when no one is watching.